This is Tim.
I'm Mulele.
And this is Critiquing Comics. Welcome to Critiquing Comics. This is Tim with Mulele in Tokyo, and we're trying to catch up on our queue here. And actually, this time we have another comic from someone who I met in Minneapolis. The artist is John Bivens, who you heard on Deconstructing Comics a while back. And this is a book that he did with, let's get our credits here. So he's the Pencils and Inks, written by Seth M Sherwood and Michael Moreci, Moreci. And this is a book called 1985 Black Hole Repo. And it's coming out from Heavy Metal. And it's basically, well, the email that I got about it says it's an alternate 1985 where the space race never slowed down. So there's much more going on in space in this version of 1985, where, of course, in the real world, after about the mid-70s, we quit going to the moon, and we just kind of orbited the Earth for a while, and now we're not really doing much of anything. We're sending unmanned satellites out. But in this one, there are all kinds of people running around in space, including the main characters who, if I'm understanding this correctly, are repo people, repossessing things that people bought but couldn't pay for. And I guess they work for a bank. I don't know. I had a little trouble understanding this story, and it's a little hard for me to summarize it because I'm not quite sure what's going on. I read it twice, and the second time I did pick up some things that I didn't the first time, and I sort of understood, I figured out why they were hard to understand. But I don't know, did you get a better grasp of the story than I did?
Well, yeah, I think so. Actually, this type of world is a little bit more my wheelhouse. Huh. There seems to be a bit of a punk aesthetic, as well as nods to Alien, Max Headroom, a couple of uncomfortable nods to Trump, although I expected a nod to Reagan because Reagan is basically a symbol of the 80s at this point. They could only make it more 80s if there was a nod to Thatcher. Nods to the dead, not dead Kennedys, the British punk band.
What, Sex Pistols?
Thank you. Nods to the Sex Pistols. Also, I don't know, anything else that's 80s. But it seems to be done from people who were maybe not so conscious in the 80s. Maybe they were kids.
Yeah, I mean, certainly, having met John, I'm sure he's younger than I am. Of course, I was in high school and college in the 80s, and I'm sure he's younger than that.
Yeah, I was in high school in the 80s, college in the 90s. And my memory of the 80s, well, I mean, I was a teenager in the 80s, so a lot of what I was looking at as I began to discover politics and clubs and girls and all that stuff, it was all set in the late 80s. So for me, all of this is kind of there. And like my uncle, who was 10 years older than me, he was a punk rock musician in San Francisco, where I lived. So I had all of that kind of predating my own discoveries of music and whatnot, because we lived together for a time. And yeah, all of that is kind of here. I mean, there are a couple of bits where I'm like, okay, that's a little bit off. Like, 250 mega yen. That one is a little bit off for me. The story seems to be a little bit reminiscent, and maybe I'm reaching here because of the title, of Repo Man the movie.
Mm-hmm.
Have you seen it?
No.
Basically, it's a story of these repo men who repossess automobiles, but there is this competition between repo companies to find this one car that's rolling around LA because it's being driven by a crazy man, driven crazy. He's a scientist who's driven crazy by the radiation coming off of the body of the dead alien in the trunk of the car. So it's kind of Area 51 plus Repo Man riding around LA, starring Emilio Estevez in what I consider to be his greatest role as the main Repo Man, but also starring Harry Dean Stanton, who recently passed. Rest in peace. And it is quite an interesting film to watch. So as I'm reading this comic, I do get shades of that. Here we have repo people going after some, or about to go after some hinky bit of space debris that it seems maybe some sort of government agency doesn't want them to touch. Or there's some sort of setup going on there. We don't know exactly what it is because this is only the first episode or first issue, and it doesn't quite get there. It establishes the characters, it establishes the world. There's some interesting bits about background bits that I think might come into play later, how they've never been, even though they're now spacefaring, they've never really been beyond the moon. And one guy thinks it's because of aliens. Aliens said, no, this is as far as you go, which is why they don't go to Mars. Another character says that Mars is where they have all the black torture sites that the government uses to extract information for whatever. Mm-hmm. It sounds like paranoia drivel, but I have a feeling it'll come into play later. Maybe. Yeah, I thought it kind of established itself pretty well. And I kind of understood what the story was headed toward. I pretty much agreed with the aesthetic, although some of the coloring can be a little bit jarring, and not jarring. It doesn't quite fit with some of the drawing, some of the inking, and so it kind of doesn't accent the inking as well as it could. Specifically looking at page 18, where there's the one naked guy floating in the cabin, and we see a view of him that I wish I'd never seen. And the background is purple, and that purple, for me, it doesn't quite work with the rest of it. It's a little bit too harsh. And other areas is a little bit better, but the coloring seems just a little bit dirty. And the inks are also a little bit dirty, in that there's splatter everywhere, and the inking is sometimes rough in places. The inking is fine. There's no problem there. But because of that aesthetic, I think the coloring can't also do that. I think it becomes a little bit too much.
I see.
Yeah.
Okay, well, maybe part of my problem was that I'm not familiar with the stuff that the Repo Man and whatever else that they're evoking, other than Max Headroom, and I guess I sort of missed that. But yeah, the President Ronald Rump is portrayed kind of like Max Headroom. I don't know. I took it that he was drunk or something, but now I get it. Okay.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, there were some places that I just thought the writing made it a little hard to follow. Mm-hmm. So, like on page 12, a couple of the repo guys are talking, and then they're approached by a couple other characters who we haven't seen before, and we don't know their names, and their names are not mentioned on that page.
Yeah.
And then, like 2 pages later, when those characters are gone, a character is talking about the Estevezes. And now I understand why that name is used, because Emilio Estevez. But it's not clear. It's not clear that she's talking about those guys that we saw 2 pages ago.
Yeah.
And I only figured that out the second time. Like, oh, okay. But the scene that they're in needed to have their names in it.
Yeah. They should have been introduced at the very beginning.
At least their family name, because if that's how they're going to be referred to. But
yeah, that would have helped right there to clear up a little bit of that. I mean, that's the thing. One little confusing point, and suddenly you kind of lose the plot.
Mm-hmm.
And it happens. It happens. But yeah, introduce a new character, especially if it's a setup with a bit of a mystery that's going to leave your reader confused for a couple of pages until another person comes in and says, it's a mystery. You kind of want to make that the only mystery. But not knowing these characters' names sets up a second mystery, which is a little bit jarring.
Yeah. I also got a little confused on page 10. I was staring at the next to last panel and trying to figure out what was going on there. Because finally, then if I looked at the following panel, then I figured it out. So there's a smaller ship going into the bottom of a larger ship. And we see in the 3 panels before that, that larger ship's doors are open. And so we're seeing the inside of the doors. And then that next panel, I figured out from looking at the last panel that the panel next to last panel is the outside of the doors as they're closing. But it's such a close-up that I couldn't figure out the context for that picture. And the outside of the doors has a drawing of a hand giving the finger. And I got that, but I couldn't figure out what that had to do with anything. And then in the last panel, you can see from a far shot that picture of a hand giving the finger is on the outside of the doors. And then I said, okay, but I didn't have any context for it before I got to the last panel. Yeah.
So this story actually in the PDF starts on page 4. And if we go to page 6, we at first see the ship for the first time. Mm-hmm. And actually what it is, it's two shuttles. One kind of a darker color and the other one with a white color, or a white one and a dark one, kind of hugging each other, bottom to bottom. And if we go down to page 7, which is a 2-page spread, so I guess it's 7/8, but anyway, 7, we can see a little bit more clearly that these 2 ships are facing, I guess, stomach to stomach. They're clamped together. That is the ship. Which is a really interesting design, but it's
you had to look really closely, but yeah, okay, I see.
Yeah, so I mean, they kind of tried to establish the ship, but they did a very bad job of establishing it, so it's absolutely not clear. It's such a weird design that I wish they had really gotten into it a little bit more, but perhaps the artist didn't like drawing the ship as much as designing it.
Okay, yeah, and then in that panel I was talking about before, where you can see the picture of the hand on the doors. Yeah, I see that now. It looked to me like the ship was shaped like a shark.
Yeah.
The window of the plane that's on the underside, or the space shuttle that's on the underside, looks like shark's teeth. But okay, I get it now.
Yeah, and I think the idea here is kind of a retrofitting, junk piling to make whatever you can out of whatever is there to live your life is the aesthetic here, and that's an aesthetic that was established in the 70s and then used to great effect in the early 80s for Blade Runner, and since then that's what it's been. In fact, if you look at the Back to the Future 2 documentary, or making of documentary, I think it's on the DVD or the Blu-ray, they get into, we absolutely did not want to follow the Blade Runner aesthetic, so we made everything shiny. And so it is recognized even 3 years after Blade Runner came out, that is absolutely not the way we want to go. 3 years, maybe a little bit longer, maybe 5 years.
Back to the Future 2 came out in like 89.
Yeah, and so if they were working on it in 88 or 87, then we're looking at 5 years after Blade Runner was released, and was a financial flop, by the way. But the point being, that's the aesthetic that they're going for, but they didn't really visualize it so people can understand very easily. You have to hunt for it. And they show that one shot, which is actually much too tight for what it needs to be. And they had 2 pages to show that, but again, way too tight. The composition is a bit off too. And so all the other stuff, even though the colorist is trying to color code, like this one's blue, that one's red, this one's white, that one's gray, it's all kind of jumbled and confusing, and I had trouble tracking which characters were which and who was doing what. There was a whole lot of problem in that sequence. I mean, I love the world, I love the technology, I like the characters very much, but the storytelling element of it, it seems like the artist needs to pull back just a little bit and show a little bit more clearly what's going on. It seems a bit of the choreography here was a little bit left a little bit too much inside the artist's head. And so you don't actually see a good shot of the ships until that last panel. But that hangar door closing so you can see the middle finger was supposed to be like the fuck the police and flipping them off kind of gesture. It works in concept, but the execution here is not so good. And the colorist needs to pull back just a little bit. He's making it confusing here. Well, no, because like when the small red shuttlecraft goes into the hangar bay of the ship that's upside down, those 3 panels above the last 2, the boosters are actually firing through the panel. Yeah. And that's just confusing. I mean, the inker didn't go outside the panel. Why is the colorist?
Yeah, it looked like the panels are bleeding.
Yeah, so
somebody shot the panels. Get a doctor.
Yeah, so it seems that the penciler inker needs to pull back just a little bit more and show a little bit more of, because he's either extremely up close or he's very far back. And when he's very far back, it's kind of hard to see who's who. And when he's very up close, it's hard to see who's doing what. And so, yeah, it needs to pull back just a little bit. More medium shots, maybe. I think it starts to calm down a little bit when the Estevezes actually first approach those other 2 repo people and warn them. Then the artwork starts to kind of find itself, or I should say the cinematography begins to find itself, and everything starts to make a little bit more sense. When the captain is making out with that girl who looks like Storm from the X-Men. Storm's mohawk design came around in the 80s anyway. So I think that's just a nod, another 80s nod. But yeah, it all seems to kind of come together right around here. And after that, it seems to be more or less together. The colorist is still a little bit garish and still messing around with the panel borders, but for the most part, yeah, it's starting to become more coherent as it goes forward.
I felt like the writing was kind of going out of its way to be crude. Just see how many 4-letter words we can put in, how many pictures of people giving the finger we can put in. I mean, that can advance the story sometimes, but it just felt gratuitous to me here.
I didn't notice it so much. Maybe I'm a little bit less sensitive to that sort of thing, but I felt that if these are basically punks in space, that would be it.
I suppose so. Yeah, I mean, if it's supposed to be punk aesthetic, you can't have a clean mouth.
Yeah, they've got a giant middle finger painted on their ship, so yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, maybe this is just not for me. I don't know. It's okay, but
yeah. I do want to mention one last thing. Now this issue ends around 22 page mark. Page 21 has these guys on a stolen hovercraft about to do something, and they realize some important bit of information, which is basically enough to kind of set everything in motion. It's kind of, okay, this is it. We're in trouble. We need to fix this problem, and we need to do this thing. And that was, I think, fine. That was well explained. But then there's one more page, which basically is a preview of things to come, which I kind of felt was not really necessary. I don't know. It points at a problem, and I understand why they would do this. I kind of wish that they hadn't. I wish that they didn't have to, maybe. This preview is supposed to be meant as a hook to pull in readers for the next episode. And it talks about some artifact that they're going to have to get from this ship that they're supposed to repo to somehow stick it to the man and absolve themselves of whatever crimes they're being accused of. And I kind of felt that was just, after all the careful build-up and all the subtle things that they tried to drop in the story in one page, just cram in a next episode kind of thing at the end was a bit unfortunate. Unnecessary with me. I mean, by page 22, if I'm not invested in the characters or the story, this one page thing is not going to do it for me. It just seemed kind of it seems almost as if they were asked to put this in by the editor, because the writing isn't there. It just seems kind of out of place, and I kind of wish it wasn't there. It kind of cheapens the whole deal.
I see.
Yeah. But anyway, you say it's not for you. I would say this is a little bit more for me. But it depends on what they do with the story. Because if I were to read the entire thing in 22 pages, and it was like an incredibly fast and furious punk swear-fueled romp through space to recover some alien technology, to uncover a government plot to oppress society, that would be great. I would be very happy with that, and amazing. 22 pages, 50 pages, whatever it is, but a one-shot. But to break it up into parts, to tease us a little bit, to tell me where we're going to go, which makes me guess at the plot, kind of see the borders of where they're going and wonder if it's worth the ride. I really want to go just to there. Maybe I want to go somewhere I don't know.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well, if you'd like us to critique your comics, send a PDF or a link to mail@deconstructingcomics.com, and we'll read at least 30 pages and talk about it here. So, till next time, this is Tim.
And Mulele.
And thanks for listening to Critiquing Comics.